Here's my second installment. It's about the Slate Dumps. Slate Dumps was over where the City Hall at Summerton is now. It's where the old mines used to be. And when they would mine that coal, it made these big old hills and stuff over there. And for a long time it burnt. It was burning underground, and you could smell it. It smelled like sulfur. But when I was a kid, people used to go over there and dump garbage and everything. It was basically a garbage dump over there. And I remember when I was little, my mother would get a big old long stick and the neighbors, and they'd go over there and ramble through that garbage. And sometimes they find some pretty good stuff they could use. You know, you might find a little plastic car that had one wheel off of it or something like that. I mean, it was just back then, it was just something to do, I guess. And the old garbage dump was probably just about where the ball field is now. That's where the garbage dump was. They had these trees, you know, where the old coal would wash down there into the lower part. It got mucky and stuff. You couldn't hardly walk through that part of it because you'd sink up. I remember my neighbor, she sunk up, you know, because like I say, it was still burning deep down in, and her foot went down in a hole, and it burned her ankles and stuff. And, you know, a lot of times you could look over there and you could see smoke coming up out of the ground. And that's the same way it was at Say Ray. Say Ray was the same way. With those hills, I remember there's several different kind of hills over there. There's one hill that had like a flat top on it. We loved that hill because after you climbed up on it, it was flat. You could actually play on top of it. One hill went up and it just dropped off. I never did like that hill. I was afraid of, I was always afraid of heights. After I got on top of that hill, it wasn't so bad. But climbing up it and coming down it, I was terrified. Sometimes I would actually get halfway and freeze up. I couldn't climb on up, I couldn't come down, and I would sit up there for an hour or two trying to figure out what I was going to do, and finally I would inch my way back down. I'm going to turn around right here. But, you know, I remember my mother, me and my next door neighbor, Joe Roberts, you know, like I say, they was, God, I can't count how many kids they had. I think 13, if I'm not mistaken. And Joe, he was probably a year or two older than me. He might have been more than that. But Mother would fix us a gallon. It was actually a canning fruit jar, a gallon. She'd put ice in it and make some cherry Kool-Aid or something and make us some hot dogs, a sack full of hot dogs. And me and Joe would go over there and spend all day long on them hills just playing around and stuff. Oh, it had pine trees. The straw would fall, you know, and a lot of times we'd go in Summerton at Skurlock's and get them big old refrigerator boxes and tear the ends off of them, and it was like an army tank. You could just roll them things, and we would get them things and roll it towards one of the cliffs, which was just straw, and we done it so much the straw made a pad at the bottom of it. So it was fun. You could go real slow because you didn't know when it was going to take off down it. And all of a sudden, whoo, there you'd go down the hill. It was a lot of fun over at the Slate Dump. They had the little small pine trees, and we would climb those trees and just get to rocking them back and forth, and we would end up riding them down. Every one of them trees was hung over like this right here from where we would ride them down. That was a playground back in the 50s, early 60s. You know, that's where we spent all our days over there, because there wasn't no games, you know, there wasn't none of that stuff. You get a old broom handle or something like that and play Mama Peg, or, you know, it was all, you had to make your own, kick the can. I don't know what that was, but we done it. Anything you could get to play with, a box or a broom handle or whatever, and you play with it. Because there wasn't much toys, you know, especially if you was poor. You know, only rich people had the store-bought toys, and that wasn't one of me. You know, we never did have, I don't remember ever having to walk for anything. I guess we was rich as a family. I remember when they built the drive-in theater over there. It was over there behind where Sonic Drive-In is right now. There used to be a theater. Matter of fact, the house up in there used to be the concession stand. Well, when they first built that, you could see it on top of that flat hill over at the Slate Dump. And we had gotten one of them little small telescopes one year, and we climbed up on that hill, and we would take turns looking at the movie screen there. And it was odd because you couldn't hear no sound, but we thought it was the most wonderful thing, being able to see that movie for free, and you couldn't even hear no sound. You didn't even know what they was doing or anything. The old Slate Dump. I remember one time when I was real little, I don't even know if I was in school yet. We was walking over there to ramble through that garbage, I guess. And I stepped on an old drink bottle or something and cut my heel. That sounds like Jimmy Buffett songs, don't it? I cut my heel, but I cut it really, really bad. And Mother put me in the back seat and put some newspaper in the floorboard where I wouldn't bleed over in the car or something. And I remember sitting in that car and looking down, and my foot was just bleeding like crazy. Or I thought it was. Maybe it wasn't. You know, I was just a kid, but I thought I was bleeding to death. But it cut a big old hunk out of my heel. I know that. And I sat there. It seems like you sit there for hours and hours and hours, but it was probably, you know, when you're a kid, you don't know the time. So it was probably 30 minutes. You know, but I remember that. And I remember right across the road from, I don't know if y'all remember this, right across the road from where Bozeman's 7-Eleven was, that Standard's Chevron station. The Pakistan guys got it now, the TJ's. Right across the road from it used to be a coal wash from the mines. And they would come and dump that coal in the bin, and it would wash the coal. And it was just right across the road from that. A lot of you old timers remember that. A lot of you young people don't remember it. All that's there now is a bunch of trees and underbrush and stuff. But, you know, I can show you where the dump trucks used to back up there and dump it into the bin. And I remember some of the older kids, and this is probably before me, talking about building pine pole sleds over there because there's a bunch of hills and stuff over there. That's a beautiful house. Log cabin. I remember some of them older kids that was probably, 5 to 10 years older than me, talking about building pine pole sleds over there. They'd get up on top and they'd cut down these trees, get all the bark off of it, and build a rail. They could build it any way they wanted to down through there, and skin the bark off of it, and then they'd oil it, and then they'd make this little old sled out of wood and stuff, and they'd put it on them rails, and it was just like a roller coaster going off them hills. I remember them talking about that. We tried to build one time, my generation, but it was too much work. So we started it and then quit. I remember they was telling the story one time about right at the bottom, they drove a nail in one of the pine poles, and they was talking about one of their friends going down it and hitting that nail. They talked about it nearly killing the boy. I don't know why they'd want to do that. Pine pole sled over at the Slate Dumps. But the entrance to the mine, the people from the mines, was right about where the city hall is sitting right now. Just maybe a little over, if you're facing the city hall, it's maybe a little over to the left where the road going up to it is. But I remember a lot of my pictures at home has got that in it. Hills, there's several hills over there. There's 2 hills especially that we used to climb all the time. I remember that one, I didn't like it because it went up and then it just dropped up straight off. And I would climb up it sometimes and look down, but I was scared of it because I was scared of heights. I don't even remember what that second one looked like, but I remember the one we played on mostly had a flat top on it. And there's another story I want to tell about the Slate Dumps when I get into the story about the motorbikes that we used to have and ride around and stuff. And the boxes, I mean, not just over at Slate Dump, but when we get them boxes, we would get in some underbrush and just ride them things like an army tank. You just roll it, and it would roll like an army tank. And there'd be spiders coming in the side and stuff. But, as a kid, you didn't care about spiders. The only thing I had trouble with, a lot of times we'd be rolling down that sage bush and stuff. A lot of times there'd be a stop sticking up. You'd be rolling, all of a sudden that thing would stick up through that box. That's the only trouble I had with it. And a lot of times it would stick in your hand and stuff. But that's about all I got. The next installment, I'm not sure. I've got it on my pad, but the next installment, I'm sure it's going to be a good one too. The old Slate Dump. Y'all remember the Slate Dump? That was my playground. There's one more story I want to tell about the Slate Dump. I ain't got it wrote down on this paper, but this was back in the 50s, early 60s. And the blacks and whites back then, I don't know, that generation didn't get along with each other very well. And me as a kid couldn't ever understand that, because I couldn't understand why you didn't dislike somebody when you didn't even know them just because of the color of their skin. I couldn't understand that. And a lot of times my mother and daddy, because they grew up that way, they was the blacks and they was the whites, and I couldn't understand that. But a lot of times I'd be at the Slate Dump. You had what they call the camp over there, and that's where most of the blacks stayed, in a community over there. And we was on this side. I guess it's got something to do with the Slate Dump. I'm not sure. I'm making this video a little bit longer talking about it, but I remember a lot of times I'd be over there and all of a sudden I'd be getting pounded by rocks. And there'd be some of them black kids over there throwing rocks at me. And I'd go home and I just couldn't understand why they disliked me and didn't know me. You know, I couldn't understand it, and I still can't understand it, because I treat people, you know, the way they treat me is the way I treat them. And like I say from my other video, I got some friends that I absolutely wouldn't take nothing for these friends. One of them is Leland Reese from Simpson. His son used to play toy bow for Sipsey. My son played for Summerton. When they both got to Dora, they both played together and became real good friends. Lilo, good friends of mine, you know, and you know, he gave me a $20 bill to go to work with one day, and I'll never forget that. When nobody else would, Leland brought a 20 out and said, "Would this help you?" And I paid him back, of course. Then got off of the Slate Dumps, but that happened over at Slate Dumps. Them black kids would throw rocks at me, and I'd go home and I'd ask Mama why they throwing rocks at me. They don't even know me. Alright, next installment be later, and hope y'all enjoyed this one. They had a lot of detail went into Slate Dumps, but we didn't get into that. I just told you the high points of riding the trees down, the garbage dump, and that's my memories of it. I mean, y'all may have your own memories or remember it some other way, but that's the way I remember it. So, see y'all on the next installment. Don't know what it's going to be.